Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about the heroes of the Trojan War. Today we'll be talking about Hector. We'll discuss how the ancient Greeks saw Hector as an example of a great hero from a heroic age, how Hector came to be involved in the Trojan War, during which he killed AJAX and PATROCLUS, but ultimately failed to defeat Achilles, and Achilles would defile Hector's body after killing him. One of the most famous conflicts in Greek mythology was the Trojan War, fought between the Greeks and the Trojans of Asia Minor during the Bronze Age. Historically, the Bronze Age was an era that spanned about 400 years, from 3600 to 3200 years ago, and saw the rise of some of the first great civilizations in Europe, including Minoa and Mycenae in Greece. However, to the Greeks of the classical age, when the Iliad and the Odyssey were written, this was a heroic era, when mighty warriors offered battle to monsters and other heroes, and when gods walked the earth among mortals. Small wonder that the heroic struggle which played such a prominent role in Greek culture was set during this glorified era. In the Iliad, our main source of information about Hector, he is described as being the eldest child of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, and heir apparent to the throne of Troy. He is further described as being a devoted husband to his wife Andromache and doting father to his young son Astyanax. This tender, family-oriented side to Hector's character contrasts with Achilles and Agamemnon, who have few interests outside of pursuing fame and power. The Trojan War itself was started by Hector's younger brother Paris, who either abducted or absconded with Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. In this time, a man could tolerate no insult. It would be a sign of weakness that would prompt his enemies to take everything he possessed, even his life. So Menelaus went to his elder brother Agamemnon, king of all Greece, to help him retrieve his wayward wife, even if that meant burning mighty Troy to ashes. Eager to pursue power and help his brother, Agamemnon agreed, and they sailed to Troy with 1,000 ships. One of those ships carried Achilles and his Myrmidons, the greatest fighting men in all Greece. Hector himself disapproved of fighting to keep Helen in Troy, but when his younger brother Paris begged Hector to protect him from Menelaus's anger, Hector could not refuse. Forgiving his younger brother's poor judgment and preference for loving rather than fighting, Hector took command of the Trojan War effort. Before the Greeks arrived, they heard a prophecy that the first Greek to set foot on the Trojan beach would die. Odysseus, in one of the early showings of the cleverness that would see him through many dangers, threw his shield on the sand and then jumped on it. However, the next person to step off the Greek ships, Protelaus, was killed in a duel by Hector after stepping on the sand, thus fulfilling the prophecy. It also meant Hector was the first to shed blood in the 10-year Trojan War. 9 years later, the Greek ranks were split by a feud between Achilles and King Agamemnon. Agamemnon seized a prize slave girl named Briseis from Achilles, and the great Greek warrior abandoned the campaign to sulk in his tent. With the Greeks vulnerable, Hector called for a duel between himself and a Greek champion. The outcome of the duel would decide the war. Ajax the Great stepped forward in place of Achilles and offered to duel Hector. After an entire day of fighting, Zeus sent heralds to proclaim the duel a draw. The two heroes exchanged gifts. Ajax gave a purple sash to Hector, with purple being the color of royalty, while Hector presented Ajax with a sword. They expressed admiration for each other's strength and skill, and ended the contest. It is worth noting that such shows of chivalry were one of the reasons why the ancient Greeks saw the Bronze Age as a golden era of heroism. In the hoplite warfare of the classical era, when war was a deadly pushing contest between armored spearmen, there was little time for such displays of mutual respect. Sometime after this duel, Hector led the Trojans out of the city gates and stormed the Greek camp. In a fearsome attack, during which Odysseus himself was wounded, Hector met Ajax the Great again. Ajax hurled a huge stone against Hector, almost killing him. Hector briefly fled the battle, but returned when his comrades mocked his cowardice. Spirit restored, Hector dueled Ajax, and Ajax was eventually forced to flee. Hector then set fire to one of the Greek ships. The attack was only turned aside in part because Achilles gave Patroclus, his best friend and likely his lover, permission to wear his armor, thus convincing the Greeks that the mighty Achilles fought with them again. Hector, guided by Apollo, sought out and killed the man wearing Achilles' armor. Exultant, Hector put on Achilles' armor as a trophy of trophies. Growing all too confident, Hector even allowed the Trojans to camp outside the city walls during the night. Achilles flew into a rage at the death of his friend and lover, reconciled with Agamemnon, and joined the other Greeks in fighting the Trojans. Achilles led the charge against the Trojan camp himself, slaughtering many soldiers of Troy. Hector rushed out to save his comrades, still wearing Achilles' armor. Once Hector realized that Achilles lived, he ran away, and Achilles chased Hector 3 times around the walls of Troy. At least they got a workout. Hector only stopped when the goddess Athena appeared to him disguised as a spearman. She claimed they would fight Achilles together. Relieved, Hector agreed to face Achilles, but the moment he stopped running, Athena vanished, having tricked Hector into facing Achilles alone. This is an example of the gods toying with humanity in the Iliad out of either partisanship for one side or the other, or sometimes just sheer boredom. Hector made a feeble attempt to negotiate with Achilles, but the enraged and vengeful Greek would not hear of it. Realizing he had no other choice, Hector battled the greatest warrior in the Greek world. The dignity with which Hector faced his fate would have redeemed Hector in Greek eyes for his previous cowardice and overconfidence. A mighty duel followed, and in one of the few times that Achilles used wit rather than brute force to defeat his enemies, Achilles remembered a small gap in the neck of his armor that only he knew of. With a spear thrust, Achilles pierced that weak spot and killed Hector. And in an act of gross sacrilege, Achilles lashed the body of Hector to his chariot and drove it around the walls of Troy. Since Achilles' horses urinated and defecated while running, this would have counted as soiling the corpse of Hector. Then Achilles drove Hector's body around Patroclus' grave 3 times, allowing other Greek soldiers to slash and chop Hector's corpse to ribbons. In the end, it took a showing by Zeus himself to convince the vengeful Achilles to cease the desecration of Hector's body. This episode showed that Achilles, while the better warrior, was a lesser man to Hector in terms of character, integrity, and piety. While Achilles rested in his tent, King Priam, Hector's father, went to Achilles to beg for his son's body. When Achilles relented and gave Hector's remains to Priam, it was seen that despite the abuse Hector suffered at the hands of the Greeks, the gods kept Hector's body intact for his funeral. Indeed, the Iliad concludes with 10 days of funeral games for the fallen prince of Troy. Hector's reputation as a valiant soldier endured even after the Greco-Roman pantheon gave way to Christianity. Medieval writers would cite Hector as a model of chivalry despite being a pagan, and in Dante's Inferno, Hector is even mentioned as being one of the worthies or pagans who were kept in limbo because they were considered too virtuous to be sent to hell. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, please let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.